So I'm Jenny Koller, and I am the Community Master Gardener, and that's a role I took on almost 4 years ago. Whenever I teach, I always like to stop and explain kind of how the community is set up, because I think there are sometimes some maybe misunderstandings about the different aspects within the community. So there's really kind of 3 entities that work in supporting the community. You have the builder, Daybreak Communities, who's out there building the new homes, and they are the ones that are always in charge of new builds and in allotting the land and doing those things, you know, as far as building the parks and making decisions on how much neighborhoods. Then there's the HOA that we all support and pay fees into, and they are the ones as far as maintenance and management. And then there's LiveDAYBREAK, and that is the team that I support. And LiveDAYBREAK is actually a nonprofit arm of the community. We are funded from money from the sale of all the homes. And that allows us to do, we like to consider ourselves the culture arm of the community, community enhancements. In most years, we get to do a lot of amazing events. Last year was obviously different, and we had to make some changes, and certain traditions that we've had in this community for a long time had to be set aside. But I feel like we did a really good job in trying to get out there and interact with the community as much as possible. So I work for LiveDAYBREAK, and I am primarily a community educator teaching these classes. I teach on a variety of subjects every month. It varies from lawn maintenance to some hands-on floral classes. All those classes are listed at my Daybreak Living. I have it at the end of the presentation. But I'm excited to be with you tonight and excited to give you this presentation. So a little bit about me. I went back to school a little later in life. I got a bachelor's degree in landscape design and horticulture. I'm passionate about ornamentals and water-wise design. I don't do much design work. I do, obviously this is a big aspect of it, as well as I am in charge of the demonstration gardens that are out by the Hub and Biscotts in our newest village, Highland Park. I did an internship at Jordan Valley's Conservation Garden Park, which is where this class is normally held, and have a long relationship with the garden park. So they have allowed me to teach Localscapes 101 to Daybreak residents, primarily because a lot of what we're doing here in the community align with the Localscapes principles. So I'm excited to share this with you tonight. I'm just going to go through the presentation. Normally I like a lot of interaction, and I'm not sure how well that works. So maybe we'll wait till the end. If you have any questions for me, as well as the last screen I'll show you will have my email address and some references for you. So let's get going. Localscapes 101, and this is an introduction to landscaping for Utah. Let's make sure you are on mute so we don't have any sounds in the background, and hopefully you can all hear me. Hold on. So Utah is really different. There's things about our climate. We are the second driest state in the nation, if you can believe that. It's hard when you have license plate, let's say the greatest snow on earth, to recognize that. But we have these really, really different climate situations, weather situations. We have these cold, normally wet winters, and then we have really, really hot, dry summers. And so that creates a lot of challenges as far as our landscaping and the things we want to see. So in 2015, the Conservation Water District, which is where we do get our water from, they did the survey. They sent it out and they said, what is most important in your landscape? What are the things that are worrisome to you? And these are the responses. 70% wish their yards offered more privacy, which is, I know, an issue for a lot of us here in Daybreak. A point, I just wanted to make sure you knew that not only do I work here in the community, but I am a resident. I've lived in the East Lake Village for 14 years. And so we have been involved in the community, involved in the schools, and great neighbors are great friends. And it's been a great place to raise our family. 87% felt their homes could benefit from more curb appeal, and only 2% are completely satisfied with their current landscape. And I love this number. 75% would like to spend less time on yard work, but most people are frustrated trying to design their yard. So Localscapes was designed for Utah. It was designed and created by water conservation managers, landscape designers, irrigation specialists, just a whole board of people who are in the industry, who are concerned and seeing problems and trying to find ways in order for people to be successful. So it's designed for Utah. It allows better curb appeal. It's really easy to understand. It increases your privacy, improve functionality, lower maintenance. For me, I love being in the garden. I love spending time there, but I'd rather be with my family at the end of the day. That's where I want to spend my weekends. It's simplified irrigation. And then it's water efficient, which is really big on our minds this year. If you've seen any of the graphics from the water industry, you will know that we are very, very behind. Now, as much as I don't want to wish for a really wet spring, we actually really, really need snow. Rain doesn't help us as much because rain, we need the groundwater. So the snow freezing and then staying those cooler temps and then the slow withdrawal from the mountains is actually more effective as far as where we're getting our water from. Localscapes can be a phased-in installation, which is really important, especially when we have budgets. And it really can fit any budget. And hopefully tonight that will, one of these things is appealing to you as far as what you want to do with your yard. I know there may be some new residents on here that are working and looking at redoing or putting in their backyards. Others are maybe you're not loving the way your yard is laid out, because let's be clear, in this community, all yards are put in by the builders. So not everything you chose and you may not be happy with. So you may be looking to make some changes. So a simple shift can really have some huge benefits. You'll see in this English style garden to the left, it's really quite lovely, but you can see all of those curved flower beds, which all takes a lot of maintenance to keep that curve and keep that shape and keep the grass out of those flower beds. There's a lot of annuals in that picture, which are much more expensive than perennials and shrubs. And then to the right, you can see this is actually a Utah Localscape designed garden. Still lots of color, lots of texture, lots of movement, with the grasses, but yet that is a water-wise landscape. So this was the breakthrough. This is where these water experts, these landscape experts came in and realized that Utah needs its own landscape style. And what I love about that is that landscape style fits right into our guidelines in our community. Daybreak, as a master plan community, really led the way years ago in making some decisions, especially in the yard landscape area. I know that there's still ways to improve. I know that people have concerns as far as community spaces and maybe what the builder's putting in, but a lot of the things, especially the drip irrigation in our planting beds and the required planting beds around the foundation, those are the first great steps to this idea. And I think for the most part, most of us are happy to be water efficient as long as those other needs are met, as long as we can have privacy, as long as maybe the low maintenance is really key for you, or having just something lovely and colorful. We can have all those things and still be water efficient. It is totally possible. So we get into this all or nothing thinking. We think of these extreme landscapes. This house to the left, like lawn, right? And it's funny, I have this conversation a lot, that lawn is easy to maintain. But truly, lawn is something you have to maintain weekly in the growing season. It's weekly. It needs consistent watering. It needs edging. It needs mowing. It needs fertilization. Whereas planter beds or other areas, the maintenance is not weekly. And so you look at a planter bed and you might think, oh my gosh, that's too much work. That's too many plants, Jenny. But really, for the most part, an established planter bed, it's much, much less work than something like this. So here's the other extreme. We hear a lot the word xeroscaping. So just to educate you a little bit, it is really called Xeroscaping. And the whole goal of Xeroscaping is reducing or eliminating the need for irrigation. But like I told you, wet, wet winters, dry, dry summers. It is almost impossible to eliminate irrigation, primarily because our Utah native plants aren't easily propagated. And to be a Utah native plant, they have to be able to do those two extremes. They have to be able to survive snow and cold in the winter, and then a hot, dry summer. And so there's not that many plants truly that are native that could go, you could put them into your yard and that you could have no water. But there are a lot of plants that require a lot less water, and there's a lot of ways to design it that you wouldn't have so much water and a lot of water waste. When I do consultations with people who are having issues in their yards, it's primarily what I do in my own business. I always, the first thing I go and double check is their irrigation system. I found that most people who are either having plants dying or lawn dying, struggle with trees, struggle with weeds, they're almost, I would say 97% of the time, over irrigated. But it's hard to know that. It's hard to see that, and understanding the plants to know that when you see something that's yellow or it looks like it's struggling, we automatically go to, oh my gosh, it's hot. It's got to need more water. But a lot of the time, a water-soaked, rotten roots, because it's got too much water, looks very, very similar to something that is, lacking in water. So this is the Localscapes house, and I'm going to leave it up here for a minute, and you're going to watch the little graphic as it turns around. Does that read to you as a water-wise landscape? I think there is nothing but love I have for this house. I think it's so beautiful. I love the color. I love the symmetry. I love all of the variety of plants. But this is not only easily maintained, but it is a water-wise design, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And we're going to talk through all these steps tonight. So the Localscapes house, this is a plan view here on your screen. You can see all those plants. So we're going to talk and go through all these things, but these are the 5 steps to a Localscapes house. There's a central open shape. Then you have your gathering areas, your activity zones, then you add your paths, and then your plantings. And the idea, behind this and going through these steps this way is you could do those, you could phase it in, right? You could phase in the different areas and have things in place. And then as you can add them, and I'll show you that in a minute, like an activity zone, maybe you want a spot for a hot tub. Well, there's some things you can do to have that space there ready to go. And you're working your irrigation planter beds around it, but maybe right now it isn't in the budget to get a hot tub. and I guess hot tubs are one of the hottest commodities right now. I don't know if anyone's tried to get one this year. But hot tub manufacturers with COVID and everything, they're like 8 to 10 months out, last I heard. So here's our central open shape. So this is a part that I want you really to start thinking about tonight. When we design a Localscapes design, you are thinking of irrigation. And it's funny because that seems natural to us, but if you're back east or in the Pacific Northwest, irrigation doesn't play a part. You have natural irrigation, you have enough water, you do things like the water, your lawn you're not getting rain come August, then your lawn goes dormant. But those are standards. But in Utah, that's never been our way. And so we have to have irrigation systems. But what we normally do is we decide all those planter beds, all those things on the outside edge, then we stick the lawn in around all the curves of those planter beds. But the reality is, if anyone has ever dealt with sprinklers, that is a really hard thing to figure out the irrigation. We end up having funny corners, we end up having cross waterings, we end up putting sprinkler heads all over the place in different spaces where they're not efficient. And that's where a lot of our waste is. But by doing this way and starting with that central open shape, we are designing irrigation for that shape, right? That's where our traditional sprinklers are, is just in those open shapes. And again, like the Daybreak way, all of those planter beds are all on drip irrigation. And let me tell you, I know that there are some people that struggle with drip irrigation. It's a little learning curve if you're not used to it. But I'll tell you right now, there is every year that we have a year like this with the lack of water, we are moving closer and closer to the chance that we're going to have a season where we're going to have water restrictions. But by having all of our plantings within a planter bed, like we have here in the community, when those water restrictions come down the pipeline, if you're familiar at all with what California did, they are going to shut off the lawn water. That's what we lose first, would be our lawns. It makes sense, right? We can have water to bathe, or we can have water in our lawns, but it would be our lawns that we would lose, maybe having limited water to, but our planter beds that we would have water to go, because drip irrigation is so much more efficient. You can't efficiently put down enough water for lawns through a drip irrigation. And there are some innovations and some great new sprinkler heads and things coming into the industry that are making that more efficient. But drip irrigation as a whole is the most efficient way to water all of your planting beds and to be able to control where that water goes. So then we add our gathering areas. One of the things that attracted my husband and I to this community is our amazing porches. Such a fun part of it. I don't know how you can't just smile if you're walking through the community, and in the summertime especially, and seeing people out on their porches. That was really nice this year with COVID and not being able to gather. We went on so many more walks, and it was so fun to be out and saying hello and just waving at people. It's really a great amenity or that we've added to a standard home. And then our backyards, gathering areas. I have actually a pretty small backyard. I luckily, we live close to the parks. It's part of the Daybreak design, is these community spaces. So we may not have huge gathering areas in our backyards, but there's a lot of innovation and a lot of fun things we can do. Our activity zones, which we have here on this one in the corners, it would be if we needed a shed on the property, it would be our vegetable planter, raised garden beds, it would be our playground equipment, our trampolines. That would all fall within those activity zones. And then we have our pathways that connect it all. And then at the end, we go in and we add our plantings. That would be the last thing we would do. So here is a real Localscape, and you can kind of see the central open shape, especially in that front yard. the way the paths are connecting. You can't really see the gathering spaces and the activity zones in that shot. So starting with that central open shape. It doesn't have to be round or oval like this back one, but we are designing that shape with irrigation in mind. We want point to point. And I'm sorry, I keep moving my hands. That's just the way I talk. I forget that that doesn't work well with those virtual backgrounds. Point to point irrigation so that we have head to head covering. I'll tell you a funny story. So like I said, we've been in our home. It'll be 14 years this spring. So 2 years ago, our park strip, we've got these beautiful oak trees, beautiful oak trees. And I had always, you know, it's always a good idea to have the lawn cut out around the trees so that you have a mow strip, so that you're never running your mower or your trimmer right next to the trunk of the trees. I see a lot of trees that are damaged and, you know, will be a loss completely because the grass is growing up and they're running the mower around it. So, and it is actually a part of the design guidelines. But I decided instead of doing a circle, I was going to have my husband cut it out, and we were just going to go more rectangular because the tree trunk was expanding and I felt there needed to be more space and the grass was really suffering in that little area right around it. So I sent him out one day to do it. But we have traditionally really struggled in our park strip with the grass dying and it not looking great. And we tweaked those sprinkler heads so many times. But again, we didn't install it. So he didn't know how many heads were on the line or what to look for. You know, we just continue to work with some of the inefficiencies. So it goes out to cut the rest of it. So it's just those little tiny corners around our 2 trees. He comes in after he finished the first one. He's like, "You're going to die. Come and look at what I discovered." So and this was for 12 years. For 12 years, we had 2 sprinkler heads that were completely covered with grass. That sometime within the landscapers laying it out, throwing down the grass really fast because the trees came in afterwards. They'd done the park strip and then they came back in and put in the trees. They covered 2 sprinkler heads, one of ours and one of our next door neighbors. Goes to work on the other tree. He uncovers another sprinkler head. So for 12 years, as we're struggling with inefficient watering and trying to figure out what we could do and, hand watering spots, lo and behold, we had 3 heads that we could have been adding that additional water to it. So we're thinking about that central open shape and we want to irrigate just that shape because everything else should be irrigated with drip irrigation. So here's a central open shape. It always works. It always works for water efficiency and saving water from runoff, and it looks great. And it can fit into fits any lot shape, which we do have some unique ones, and we have longer yards. So it's just kind of changing our thinking a little bit about how our lawn should look and how it should be shaped, and not sticking it fence to fence. So you look to the left at this landscape, and really with all that lawn, how much is really usable? They've got these trees floating. You can see there's a kidney bean island, circa the 1990s. That was a big design thing, the kidney bean floating out there with usually a blue spruce that overgrows the space, and then having those trees there. So then where do you run around? Where do you have that play area? And then the right, you can see all the lawn area is usable. You actually are gaining more space in that area by making that usable. So to the left, again, island in the lawn, which I don't love the fact, as a design look that you're blocking the house. And then you've got these little tiny spaces all around that shape that you're trying to efficiently water. How do you do that? How many sprinkler heads do you have to have? I wondered if originally, you had sprinklers right there by the sidewalk and clear up by the front of the house that were trying to cross water. And now that your plants have grown up, you're competing with that and your trees. But to the right, you can see the lawn is the island. So that is really, really key as far as this concept goes. This is actually a house in Creekside. It was called the Blogger House. It was used in the Parade of Homes, and this was designed by Cynthia B. out of the Water Conservation Garden. It's a really lovely example of one of the first Localscapes designs, even before Localscapes was created, but it is a Daybreak design. And it's really quite lovely, the dimensions of it, but it's again, that central open shape. How we imagine we use our lawn, right? The spontaneous family soccer games, all these kids running happily, but we don't really use it a lot that way, especially in our community where we have access to so many great community spaces to go out and really do those things. And we will continue to see home lots shrink, just as housing market keeps going crazy and affordable housing issues are there. Big lots are kind of a thing of the past. And I feel like we're that much busier to not spend our Saturdays doing this, edging and weeding and mowing. That is a weekly maintenance in order to keep the grass looking good. That's not what I want to spend my time doing. So I do think we need less lawn than we really think we do, as far as what is usable. The lawn should be designed. We should think about it first whenever we're thinking of redoing it. It should be unobstructed. It shouldn't have these floating beds in it. And I'd like to point out the tree to the right. I'm hoping I'm saying that right, but I think you're following me. Do you see that stake that is running up next to the trunk of the tree? This is a really, really big issue that I see all the time. I see it constantly, especially in commercial spaces, but in homes. This is actually, that is not a stake. That is a planting stake meant for shipping. So when that tree is on the truck coming down from Oregon, that is to prevent tipping. So the pots stay up and then the trunk, the weight of the trunk isn't shifting, and it's meant to protect the top of the tree so it doesn't get, knocked off. And it's a support system for the tree. That stake should be removed the second that tree goes into the ground. And what will happen is that stake will be left on, and those little green floral tape, landscaping tape is left on. And suddenly, as that tree tries to grow, it is getting girdled in all those spots. And what usually happens is then the stake is removed. At a later point, the tree starts to struggle and dies, and people assume, well, it's because I removed the stake. And that is not the case. Every second you leave that type of planting stake on, you're compromising the tree. A tree to be properly staked needs to have a triangle, 3 stakes. 2 is okay. 3 is ideal. There needs to be movement within where it touches the tree. It cannot be that tight. And staking is only recommended, even out here with our gale force winds, it's only recommended for the first year of planting. Because otherwise, then the tree starts to rely on the stakes and doesn't put the roots down. The rooting system doesn't develop like it should. So there you go. Now you're going to see that kind of tree everywhere, and it's going to drive you crazy. So you'll be wanting to lovingly inform your neighbors of what you learned tonight in the garden class. We do not want any lawn less than 8 feet wide. It is really hard to irrigate. And yes, I know park strips tend to be small. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's a hot topic these days. And I saw some discussions on Facebook about it, but we will talk about that. Lawn is not a great designated path. It doesn't handle that foot traffic. And usually our paths are on the side of our homes. And so it's not easy. Usually it's shaded or it's too sunny over there. And lawn is just not a great alternative. It's not meant to have that much in that space. And then you've got all these wonky bed lines that you're having to edge and then irrigate in. You know for a fact that those little sharp corners would all be starting to struggle once irrigation system kicks in. We shouldn't have lawns on slopes or hillsides. And I know it's unfortunate because we do have some homes built on hillsides and the developer will put in the lawn there. But that's something maybe that you need to address or think about as you are looking at ways to update your landscape. These are a couple side yard solutions. The pathways, using different ground cover. That on the right is that steppable thyme that looks really lovely within those rocks, the flagstone pavers. Rocks can be used in the landscape. They are not, they can be used in side yards. Now again, I don't work for the HOA, so I can't speak to all the details and what is always approvable and not approvable. I know that they won't do anything that has an orange or red tone as far as flagstone or any rocks, but I do believe it's an acceptable mulching option in side yards, not necessarily in front garden beds. So then we're talking about our gathering areas. These are our patios, our covered seating, we see a lot here in the community, really, really beautiful pergolas. This is what we'd be thinking about, those gathering areas. And they really tend to make the most sense, gathering areas, when they are closely accessible by the house, because that's usually where food is served and you're coming in and out of the door, and you want to access that close to the house. So then the second thing is you put in that central open shape, you're designing the lawn, then you want to add those gathering areas. You want to add, you can see on the rectangular lot, there's a gathering area there and maybe a gazebo back in a corner. Really some great ideas. And again, the community and the HOA, as far as the guidelines, is open to quite a bit of things. It just wants to be thoughtfully planned in anything that we submit to the HOA. They just want it to be thoughtfully planned and have details that makes it more effective. And I'll just stop here. Next month, I don't know if we'll be able to teach it live, but I am teaching 2 nights of a design class. It's the same class as, again, a Wednesday, Thursday night, where I will be discussing specific design principles, how to incorporate this. I will give you some tricks on how to be effective in submitting your plans to the HOA. And we can talk through a lot of that specific stuff that night in that class. This is a home that was built, again, for the Parade of Homes. It's up in Creekside. It was part of a model home village where the gathering area is actually in the side yard. But you can see to the right that they put some trees there that will allow for some long-term privacy, even though it's a side yard. And then I love the way that they have the 2 different surfaces in this as far as the gathering areas. They have the Trex deck up with the pergola over it, and then the open space below. This is another yard here at Daybreak with a beautiful fireplace, outdoor fireplace, and then that pergola taking up, and in this yard, because this is my friend's yard, they've cut out a huge chunk of that grass and made their watering so much more efficient. So the lawn that they do have is much more successful in this area. So you can add secondary seating. Not all of us have big enough yards to support that, but it is always fun if you have the space to be able to kind of have secret spots in the back. This is a great to maybe add a fire pit area that maybe isn't so close to the house, because maybe you don't want the teenagers hanging out there talking so close to the house. Maybe they don't want to be that close. These are really, really great plantings in this yard. This plant to the right of the screen, you can see the light pink and purples, is an elderberry. It's actually a favorite plant of mine. It's a shrub. It's similar in looks to a Japanese maple, but it is a lot more water efficient and a lot less fussy. So these are gathering areas. This one shows a front yard gathering area. We primarily have our front porches as it, then the patio, the private seating area. So then our activity zones. This is your vegetable gardens, your children's play area, tramp, hot tub, those kind of things. And again, because we've already designed our sprinkler systems, because that is for our grass areas, then we can go in and add these play areas. So you see here, this has got some playground equipment on it. By having the irrigation start at the grass and not in the playground, if and when those little ones grow up like mine did, and playgrounds aren't their thing anymore, you could easily take that playground down. You don't have to move any sprinklers, and you could create like a fire pit area back there. So it's thinking about that. We don't need to irrigate that area. We shouldn't. We don't want to have plant or mud underneath any of our playground equipment or underneath the tramps. So think of those things. Finding the right surface for those activities where, maybe pebbles or, bark chips, something underneath that surface that is different from the lawn. I try honestly not to use any bark because I feel like it's just such a lawn menace. Jumping into our flower beds, it's really hard to keep contained. And so the heavier, heavier type of ground cover mulch works better under these activities areas. So then we're coming in our design, we're adding those play areas, our raised garden beds. And then we need to connect it all. We need to connect it all to our paths. And we need to be able to access that. We need to be able to get to and from those spaces. And it's visually so appealing. It's so nice to be able to go from one side to the next and to see where you're going. And it's so great to do it. I have an example at the end of a yard that was designed by Cameron Alcott out at Progressive Plants. It's a Daybreak yard, and that side yard, how he took advantage of that side yard situation and really made it quite lovely. Okay, so we're connecting with those paths. We're taking from the front yard to the backyard. It's really important in our side yards, and really to think, especially any of you new homeowners, to think about how you want to get your lawnmower and your equipment around, having that hard surface. Also, we're thinking we don't all stay so young, so we want it to be as even of a surface so it's safe to be able to move along. We can go back to having garden parties. We want people to be able to travel along those paths. So think about those surfaces. And again, we wouldn't want irrigation coming over the top of those surfaces. We would want to be just irrigating on the flower beds around it. So those backyard paths. And again, we're cutting up more of our landscape, but what we're creating is really, really usable space. So we're losing, landscape that's just would maybe normally be lawn by adding those paths. And then our last step would be the frosting on the cake, and that would be our planting beds. Lots of dimension, a lot of things we can do. And I will go in more in depth in that next month in the design series. But, I remember building our home and people knowing that I loved my garden and saying, oh, do you really want to build out there? Do you, aren't you limited? Aren't they going to tell you what you can and cannot plant? Truly, what we can plant is what we should plant, because it's plants that will thrive and do well within our Utah landscapes. Anything that is on the Conservation Gardens planting site, they have a plant list. They have a great online catalog, as well as out of Progressive Plants. They all will do well here, and they are all approvable for the most part. We don't, quaking aspens, they don't go great. They don't grow great here. They need the benches. They need that microclimates up there. They don't do great down in the valley. We don't allow them to grow here. They become more junk trees down here and less effective in those planting beds. So that's just one of those things is on the list that you can't plant. So you want to think about your trees and then your shrubs, perennials, and small plants. Now that I've done this so long and I have made renovations in my own yard, I use quite a bit more shrubs than I do trees, because again, I have a compact landscape and I need privacy. We have a hot tub in our backyard, and so privacy is really key. And shrubs for the price point and the growth rate and the ability to trim them down and the maintenance on them are really, really effective. It's a way to get some immediate privacy into the landscape and be cost effective. And again, I will talk more about that next month. So here it is, this complete square lot, this Localscapes design. And I just really feel like it's quite appealing and a lot of dimension to it. But then you look at it and you don't immediately think this is water-wise. Again, this is another angle. And then that's that odd shaped lot like some of us have. Being smart about that. So Localscapes, this design principle, it actually has a lot of advantages. If you are thinking that you want to do a Localscapes design, by attending this class tonight, you've taken the first step. There are actually some pretty substantial rebates available to you by doing a Localscape. If you're renovating a yard or you're putting in a backyard, I really encourage you to go to this website to sign up and to investigate next steps, because they can help you with your design as well as planting ideas and in things and ways, and tell you about the ways that maybe you can make a renovation or submit a new plan, which we have to submit plans anyways to the HOA in order to get an install done in a way that could potentially save you more money. So they have design plans there. This right here, conservationgardenpark.org/plants. This is that planting list I told you about. And if you've never been out to the Conservation Garden Park, I would encourage you. It is open year round. Obviously right now there's not a ton to see, but come spring, it's a free botanical garden. It's just in West Jordan. It's about 18 minutes from here. You can take your kids, you can take a picnic, you can go out and you can see every plant within that garden is water-wise and would do great in your yard. Lots of opportunities. There's lots of dimension out there. There's lots of things to see. You can see the trees and the shrubs at the different times of year. You go in the spring, you can go back in a couple months and see where it's at in the summer. So you can see the blooming time. But this list here, this resource is a great, great resource as far as looking at design options, looking at shrubs and trees that will do well here and that will be water efficient, as well as thrive within our crazy growing conditions. So why do all of this matter? I hope those numbers are staggering to you. I hope when you think about those two different designs and you see that difference, that's how much we can save by this smart water-wise planting. And, you know, I want, you know, the Joneses. I have some great Joneses neighbors, but you living here as close as we are and having these resources that we almost share as our yards, like my yard melds into my neighbor's yard. I want the best. I want people to see the best. I want them to walk into our community and think this is an amazing place to live and look at how great people are doing. And it's so pleasing to the eye. But at the end of the day, I am a water conserver. I am passionate about this because I know that it can be done in a way that is still beautiful and lovely and have curb appeal, but that's not going to require me out there all day Saturday. But it's going to do this, that it's going to save that. Because I want a shower. I want to be able to, you know, be on the lakes. I want to be able to recreate here in Utah. I want to be able to, you know, have water for more houses to be built so that my kids have a place to live. So all of these things are super important, but this is where, again, not only is it smart and is it conservation minded, but it's money. right? It's money. It's our resources that we're wasting by overwatering, or by having an inefficient landscape. So there's a Localscapes University. I'm not quite sure how they're doing it this year, but again, localscapes.com would be your next step. And I know they're doing a lot of things online. They have some design workshops, and they are going to have some irrigation workshops that will help you some hands-on as far as irrigation. And irrigation, for the most part, when we're designing for that center open shape, is pretty easy to figure out. And a lot of DIYs in the world of YouTube, there's a lot that we can figure out ourselves and do. So when we look at this, there's just so much that is wrong, right? You know, having those trees out there, trying to water those trees at the same rate you're trying to water the lawn. That doesn't look very pleasing to play on. There's no zoning, there's no specific places as far as what the activities are. Then you look at this, right? This is quite lovely. This is at a park. But how in the world do you water that little lawn section, right? And how do you keep all those annuals, which are more water thirsty plants, alive with that overhead sprinkling efficiently? And then you've got these big shrubs floating in that bed. That's going to be hard. I'm sure there's some hand watering. Of course, this is probably where they can afford the maintenance to keep this up to look the way they do. But you can see just beyond it, some really dense plantings and some Russian sage and some beautiful, looks like some hummingbird mint, things that are water efficient, and probably don't need this kind of watering. So all of it. So this is your yard localized. So I'm going to take you to these are a couple of our neighbors here, here in the community that have had their yards approved by the HOA to pull out their lawns and replace it with shrubs. And these are just some really great examples. This is early on, and obviously it's not blooming. And again, it's perennials and shrubs. So you don't get that immediate gratification you do maybe with annuals, but you could, do something like this, start out. And if you wanted more color in that first season, you could stick those annuals in around it. That's a great thing about drip irrigation. Also, pots are such an amazing way to add to our porches, to add that color, to add that dimension to it without putting them in our flower beds and having something that we have to keep up on. And this is the other side to that yard. You can see it's in spring and the tulips are just coming out. So this is one, if any of you saw this on Facebook, I asked her today, Melissa, if I could borrow these images where she has pulled out all that front lawn. And I'm going to just tell you now that you probably look at it and think weeds, right? You're thinking, oh my gosh, that's so many planter beds, that's weeding. The number one most effective thing to do for weed prevention is not landscape fabric, it's not chemicals, it's efficient watering. And by drip irrigating those plants, I'm sure this is point source where it's just one tubing to each of those plants, it almost eliminates weeds. I bet you this is less maintenance than any lawn. It doesn't look like that. And again, I always teach this in the design class. If you are spending hours pruning shrubs, pruning things through your growing season, you need to Marie Kondo it, thank you for its time, and get rid of it. Because if you have to do that much maintenance on shrubs and plants, you've got the wrong plants for the space. They're not going to be happy if you're continually having to, cut it down and create a ball or something like that. When we do that kind of maintenance, it's that much more work. I mean, this in the next couple of years is going to be amazing. I cannot wait to go back and see it when it is in full bloom. So here is my list of resources. This is a side yard to that home, just really quite lovely. Here is a list of resources. This is my email address. This is my Instagram handle. And then this is my daybreak.com/live, which is where you're going to find all of the Live Daybreak events, but including all of my garden classes that I will be teaching throughout the season. So I would love to open it up to questions. If there's something I can answer for any of you. You have to make sure you unmute so I can hear you.
Hi, Jenny.
Hello.
I have a question.
Okay.
I want to plant bamboos, but I know, like you said before, it's so invasive, so we have to put boxes first, and then, so how do you do that?
Well, we'll need to double check that bamboo is not on the Daybreak list to make sure it is approvable, because it is considered an invasive plant. Where I've seen it the most successful is using either some sort of like trough that is dug out within the flower bed, backfilled in with soil, and then the plants being within that trough. So it has a metal little like gird around it in order to keep it. I mean, bamboo is gorgeous and it grows fast and it's super easy to maintain. But once it's let out of control, it's super hard to bring it back into control. So you can email me, Mayumi, and we could do a little research on that to make sure if that is something you want to add, that we're doing it the right way.
I don't know anything about gardening, really. I do a lot of Googling since I'm bored at work. There's a clumping bamboo called Fargesia, Fargesia. So it's not the running bamboo. So it doesn't shoot out the rhizomes or whatever it is everywhere. And that one's really cold tolerant. I'm considering that as well. And I did not see it on the banned list.
Okay. So we can, yeah.
Would you write that?
Or will you email me? Will you email me that name, and I will have that resource out for people. And there's a lot of grasses that have really thick, hardy stems that also give that look of bamboo without some of those characteristics. But for a guy that just Googles, that was very informative. Thank you.
Well, I did it all wrong. I started my yard and then I'm learning. So I really have to decide what I'm going to rip up now that I just paid for. So I'm not very happy. But
yeah, it is hard. With my front yard, I put it in really fast, and people would come by and, oh, your yard is so beautiful. But for me, it was really busy. I put a lot of colors and didn't think a lot about that design side of it because I just wanted to have as many of my plants that I loved. Also, I did a lot of full sun plants, but I have a 2-story house that face west. So typically it would get full sun, but now I have these 2 huge oaks, a 2-story house that by the time the sun comes over, I had all my plants and they were all starting to lean out over the lawn, trying to seek out more sun as they got bigger. And I didn't love that look. And so it took having the house painted and having some damage done that I finally gave myself permission, like, it's not going to work great. It's not been what I wanted. And so it's allowed me to make some edits and to do something different.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to plant some vegetables.
Yes.
In my yard. What can I do? I don't eat flowers. I want to eat vegetables.
You can plant vegetables directly in your garden beds. We would consider that an annual. And as long as you're using just a small percentage of your flower beds for a vegetable garden, you'd still have to have some foundation plantings as far as some of those HOA guidelines. But I have planted tomatoes just within my flower beds, pumpkins along the edges in those planter beds. You can have great success in doing that. So there really isn't that many limitations as far as putting vegetables directly in your planter beds.
Do I need to ask you guys to tell me how I do the, the yard so I can plant.
You're cutting out a little bit there.
Sorry?
Are you asking whether or not you have to ask permission to do that?
Yeah, do I have to ask you guys to show me how to lay out the flower beds and stuff like that and the vegetables? Or I can, see, I found out that it's good to, instead of having a raised bed, it's got to, it's better to plant directly to the soil. That's what I found out, because I planted some.
And there are a lot of different examples where you can find success. Like we have the community gardens, and I know a lot of residents find a lot of success in those community gardens. Soil is super, super key. Soil is key for everything you plant, especially anything that's producing, that is producing, right? Flowers or vegetables or anything that's trying to actually put out within one garden season. So soil and water efficient watering is super key. So I am teaching in the month of March. I'm actually teaching every Wednesday night, I'm teaching a garden class specific to vegetables. We're going to start like soil prep will be the first week. The second week will be irrigation. Then we'll do plant selection. And then the fourth week will be produce and what we can use with it. So that may be of interest to you. And again, you can send me a direct question at my email address for something more specific. But you're right, soil is really, really key in everything that we're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Quick question, Jenny, can you hear me?
I can.
Great, this is Ken Black and Judy Black here. Just wanted to find out if there's a place we can check for plants that thrive in shade, no sun. We want to plant plants that thrive in shade or that are in a shady area. It's no sun at all whatsoever on that part of our yard.
And there are some, and Ken, the conservation garden list, and I can, if anyone wants to email me and wants me to send out this presentation to you, I'm happy to do that. The conservation garden has a really comprehensive list. And the one thing I love about it is you can filter it down. So everything on that conservation garden site is water-wise, does well here, but you can filter it down by saying, I'm looking for a shade. I'm looking for a shade perennial, as well as progressive plants. Those are my two main go-to. High Country Gardens, which is an online catalog store where you can have plants, but you can also look there and again, filter down your results. I'm looking for a perennial in that shade category. Hostas are really great. They almost require, in my side yard, I have just some amazing hostas that have done nothing but succeed as long as I stay up on the snells with no sun at all. So they're a favorite and a really easy care plant that gets you a lot of bang for the buck.
What kind of plant was that again?
It's a Hosta, Hosta. And you can actually buy them in the next probably couple of weeks at Costco. You can buy a 3-pack, and that's what I've done. Really, really great, beautiful big leaves, because most plants that have a really big leaf is because they have some shade resistance. They have that bigger leaf so that when they photosynthesize, they have enough plant surface in order to get whatever they can to photosynthesize.
Good to know.
I don't know if it's true or not. Again, I just Googled, but the Hydrangea Limelights, I thought about putting in my full shade area.
They do actually, Limelights are a hot new design in Utah because they do well in shade, but they also do well in sun. And they're, they don't, because we have this alkaline soil, and usually hydrangeas like acidic soil for their colors. So the limelight with that kind of light lime, it really is a light lime color that slowly softens in kind of a pink tone, and then has a really pretty rust seed head on it through the rest of the season. Do really, really well. The little limes are really great. They are a smaller, more compact size of the limelights, because the limelights themselves could be 6x6 shrubs.
Hi, this is Diana. Can you hear me okay? I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the presentation was super helpful, especially since I know nothing about gardening. I did have a quick question. It looked like from your presentation that having, I guess, a tree planted in the middle of sort of your lawn, your central zone, was not ideal. The home that we just purchased and had built in Daybreak does have a tree planted in the middle of the green area, which I think is pretty because I do like the English garden look, but in wanting to make sure that it does well and does okay, would you recommend pulling it up and putting grass down, or what would you do since they put it in?
Not necessarily if it's a tree you love, because again, we can't always control those things. If it's a tree you love, you can efficiently water. My oaks are doing really great in my park strip that I'm not watering on drip irrigation. They're a super huge tree. It's just really being conscientious about maintenance around it. It's honestly my bigger concern, because for the most part, trees need more water than our shrubs and our perennials. So trees in a lawn will usually survive, but it's looking at those irrigation heads, right? Like as that tree trunk expands, will you have an irrigation head behind it that will eventually be hitting into that trunk of the tree, which then will be preventing the lawn in front of it to getting irrigation? That would be one thing to consider, moving it. And if it's been planted within this last year, you should be able to move it fairly safely, but also making sure, which not everyone loves this look, that you have a full mow strip around that tree. And as that tree continues to expand, potentially you're supposed to have where the drip line is of trees, which is the edge of the tree branches, you were supposed to not have anything underneath that surface where those roots are establishing. You definitely don't want to be mowing over it or string trimming around it, as well as when you've got a new tree and you've got new roots coming off of, especially on the top, those feeder roots. When we're putting down heavy fertilization for our lawn, that's not necessarily great, because in trees, we're trying to establish rooting systems for the first 5 years. So we usually don't want to be over fertilizing rooting systems, because then the tree is taking that to go up to the growth, which is great. We want the growth, but not at the expense of a rooting system, because rooting system is how we'll have a successful tree, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, so I guess I'll have to think about it. It's sort of in the front corner. So it's not into the planting beds yet that have the drip lines, but it's probably less than a foot or two away.
And
so
maybe it makes sense to expand the bed line rather than move the tree. To expand the bed line out and encompass the tree, even if the tree sits right at the edge of the bed line, just so that it's within those planted beds with that drip irrigation.
So you would then add drip irrigation to support the tree?
Yeah, because then you'd have to be moving the irrigation so that you're having point-to-point coverage on any of those lawn spaces.
Okay, awesome, thanks. Yeah, I may email you separately if I have more questions, but thanks, that was helpful.
Okay,
My
great.
front yard tree, I thought about moving, but I forget what it is now, but I think it's growing up to be something gigantic. So I don't want to move it right next to my house. Right. So just make sure you know what your tree is and the size it will be if you do end up deciding to move it closer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's funny that, again, when you're having landscapes done in mass, which usually happens in the new build areas, sometimes you're looking at that thinking, is that just an immediate, you just getting that in, because that's not going to work in the long term. I know in our alleyways down my street, we have, the 2-foot bed in front of the fence. And I have lots of neighbors who have big, huge sand cherries, and sand cherries could be a 12 by 12 shrub in a 2-foot, and then there's 4 of them planted together. The neighbor had just to paint his fence and chop those babies down. They can handle quite a bit of pruning, but again, you're thinking, is that the right shrub for that place?
And that'll be one of my questions. I've got a 2-foot bed along the fence, and I'm looking for something for privacy. I'm thinking something like a DeGroot spire maybe, or an emerald green that doesn't come out too far. But the landscaper I have coming wants to make the bed bigger. And now I'm thinking I'll take out the lawn entirely and put in a path and just make them big planting beds on the side. But my question one is, what do you think about privacy, good privacy trees? And two, what would you use for the ground cover? On that, the picture of that house, I couldn't tell what they were using in the planting beds in their front yard. And then I've got a significant grade too. So what sort of ground options are available besides making it solid rock or solid dirt?
Yeah, and I mean, really, a great planting bed to me is 3 feet at the minimum, because I like depth within my planting beds. I want something tall in the back and then bringing it forward in those different heights. And the two that you mentioned, the arborvitae, there's the upright junipers. I really like the buckthorns. There's a fine line buckthorn that is a thinner edge. If you like, some people think it looks a little modern. I don't necessarily think it looks modern. I also love grasses. We've got some of those upright grasses that aren't as branching and that can get to the 6 feet tall. If you're talking over fence,
I want him at least 10 feet probably.
Yeah, buckthorns are one of my favorites because they're both columnar. There's a tall hedge buckthorn and a fine line buckthorn, and the tall hedge can actually get to be about 20 feet, but it can take a lot of pruning. I have a neighbor who has them down our alleyway, and I also have a neighbor who has them as a privacy panel between their yard and the neighbor's yard. They can take a lot of pruning, but you get height, you get some instant. There's a new elderberry that's really quite lovely. It's the licorice stick elderberry that is an upright, and we're seeing it more and more in the industry where they're making, bringing out more columnar style, versions of plants. So send me an email and I will send you some more ideas, because my brain starts going in different directions and I have to get more in the design mode to start thinking of plants. And I don't do a ton of design work. I try to stay up on the industry trends, but usually I have to do a little bit more research. So I'd love to throw you some ideas though.
The buckthorn is not an evergreen though, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So I'll look up the licorice stick elderberry. So the other thing is just ground cover options. I know we talk about making it so you don't have lawn. I think we need to concentrate on, well, then what do I have besides dirt, Right.
Oh, and your question about what that gal had. So my personal preference for mulch is actually compost. And I do get it from the Trans-Jordan landfill. I get it every season. And this is the thought process behind using that. Some people are wary about using it. Just know I've used it for almost 20 years and I don't have more weeds. But what I do have is I have amazing, amazing soil. So in Utah, we have dirt. That is just the nuts and bolts of what we've got. Unless you happen to be on prime farmland, for the most part, you have clay, rocky soil. I always tell people, what can you grow in South Jordan? We grow rocks like nobody's business, because we may have cleaned off an area in a bed and then we go to dig up a hole and suddenly there's more rocks and you're thinking, I thought I cleared all that out. Well, because rocks, constant movement, the whole tectonic plate stuff is constantly moving those rocks to the surface. So in order to get really good soil, we have to do something to it. It just doesn't happen. Organic material, organic material, organic material. And compost is, to me, you get the best of both worlds. When you use it as a top layer, as a mulch layer, then, so this is what I usually do. I come in, clean up my yard in the spring. I test all my drip irrigation, make sure it's working. I pull everything up. I don't just let drip heads, especially point source drip heads, just be hidden, because I want to make sure water is getting everywhere. I do that. I love to plant some annuals, so I stick some annuals in. I have pretty dense flower beds. And then I go and get my compost and I top dress my beds 2 to 3 inches everywhere. And then I water it in. I have spinner heads irrigation in a lot of spots, so I can turn that on and it waters it in so it doesn't blow away. You can do it with, a spray head on your hose. You water it in and then you leave it. If you have to plant something, throughout the garden season. Then I slowly scrape it away, plant it, push that back around it. It keeps that nice fine line. It shows the bed lines more distinct. And then what's happening is every time we water or rain, have a water event, it's breaking down that organic material and it's going through the soil profile. It's becoming available to the roots of our plants. Therefore, we're getting more natural nutrients. I try to use very little chemicals in my yard. And I really, really love that way. So that would be my basic for every planting bed when you're starting out. And that's what you saw in those gals' pictures, is she just used compost material in order to also, it meets those two requirements, because we're required to have a good mulch within our flower beds, but we're adding organic material. If we use rocks, yeah, it's great because it lasts, but rocks can add a lot of heat immediately to our plants. It's really hard to see drip irrigation. If you've ever been to a commercial property where they have rocks, you will see lines where you can tell that plants have died because you're not being able to visibly see how the irrigation's working. And then as far as ground covers, I have like 4 or 5 in my yard that I love. I do like the vinca vines, especially in side yards. It's the vinca vine. And again, I can send all this to you. I love, there is a Veronica that's a really short Veronica that's a really tight ground cover. The tines are really great. They are steppable. And there is a whole line in the nursery section of steppable ground covers that allows more, especially if they're going to be right near a footpath, or if you've got littles that are going to running and not necessarily stay on the footpath. Sweet Woodruff is a great one. It dies back completely in the fall, and so you kind of can't see it, and then it comes up and it just stays really, really short and has little white flowers in the spring. Creepy Jenny is a great one. It's a viner, but it does die back in the fall, and it's pretty easy to control, but it has a really nice matted look and you don't get a ton of weeds. So again, as far as weeds go in that last yard that I said, that's less maintenance. Part of by having that thick mulch layer and watering to those individual plants, she's not going to have a ton of maintenance because the weeds won't have a chance to grow because they're suffocated underneath that mulch layer and they're not getting water by having that efficient irrigation. Is there anything else?
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Yeah, this is Anna. So we're moving to Daybreak this summer to Highland Park, and
Awesome.
yeah, we're excited. Our yard in the front will not be very big, but we do not want grass at all. Will that be an issue with the builder at all, do you think?
It might be. And part of it is when you're building a house, they've already got stuff pre-approved. It's unfortunate that it's that way. From my understanding, for most residents, I haven't heard that there is one builder that's better. Basically, it's like they've got the flat plans, they've been approved. And actually those building plans are actually approved by the Daybreak communities, the builder side of it. So it's not even the HOA that then turns around that we know is maybe looking at, you know, what we're doing in our homes. It's kind of a funny relationship when you have an HOA that's requiring these certain things, but then you have a builder who in my own personal opinion, not speaking for anyone in Daybreak, I don't love all the things the landscapers are doing. I don't love some of the thought processes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my foot in that door to speak to the builders. I've offered up to come and talk to them about, hey, this is what I'm seeing in the community. But a lot of times it seems like people have to have them just put in the yard, which there's the advantages that you have the irrigation set up that way, but then you have to go in and make those adjustments. Fortunately, a new landscape is pretty easy to edit. It's those of us who have, you know, really established lawns or problem areas that it's harder to kind of make changes to.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
What street, Anna?
Ivy Glen
Ivy
Way.
I don't know that one. I'm in Highland Park, so I was just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, my demonstration gardens are out there in Highland Park by that swimming pool. So if you're out there this summer swimming and you see me working in the garden, come by and say hi. I had a terrible, I actually had a kind of my worst year out there in the gardens, and I was really struggling with my tomatoes. And I finally realized what it was is I have a rodent issue out there. There is burrowed beds underneath my boxes. So that's not very fun. I got so paranoid by the end of the season that I would pull up a tomato plant and have, I don't know, mice, but supposedly they're getting it taken care of for me. So
Probably voles.
I wondered that, except for the holes were really small. And what I've seen as far as vole damage, which I only seen it in lawns, they were bigger holes, but I don't know.
Ours is brand new houses, and 3 houses here in a row, we all have vole traps out. Just from the same
So maybe that is. So yeah, they're supposed to, you know, in this early spring before the pool or anything's open, I do anything, help me figure that one out. So. Well, it was great to talk to you all. I definitely love the more in-person classes, but so if you see me out in the gardens, like I said, stop by to say hi. Here's my information. Happy to answer any questions for you. Let me just look really quick at my calendar. So the 24th and 25th of February is my design classes. It will, you know, pop up on Facebook, as well as you can link it here, and they'll let you know whether or not I'm going to be able to do that in person. I'm kind of thinking we still will have to do it online. And so I've been working on that presentation to have it be more in depth, as well as, you know, some of your questions tonight were about specific cultivars of plants that maybe, you know, that I've seen successful. And so I will have Jenny's favorites list attached to that. So it will just give you some ideas of plants that I've loved and I've seen be successful here.
Did you say there is a class tomorrow?
There is, but it's the same class.
Same class. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not a 2 nights thing. So
all right.
It's the exact same class. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks so much. It's been great having you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.